Hello and welcome back to our podcast, the Unofficial Film Club, with me, Caroline.
And me, Andrea.
Yeah, we're just gonna talk about some movies and our thoughts on it. I don't know.
That's it.
Yeah, that's basically how this thing works. But yeah.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the Disney version, although we will kind of be bringing up some things from the book probably. But yeah.
Yeah, we're focusing on the Disney one because, it's one of our favorites.
Yeah.
It's great.
Musically, narratively, visually, it's just a really good
It's a good
version.
movie. I like it
Yeah.
a lot. And also there's kind of like a lot to work with too.
Yeah.
It's a well-known adaptation,
Yeah,
I
and
would
actually
say.
the fact that it is, a Disney movie and it is kind of created for younger audiences adds to the complexity of the plot, I feel.
Yeah, because one could argue that it's not even really for children.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think it's more for like older people,
Yeah, same.
teenagers and older, because there's a lot of intensity and complexity with themes that are kind of dark. Like, no wonder it was, almost given like a PG-13 rating, I think. Like, I think it was, one of the few that have a PG rating,
Mm-hmm.
which is like a big deal
That's
in
true,
Disney.
yeah. Yeah, so today we're gonna specifically focus on Frollo because he's a pretty complex character.
Mhm.
Um, one could argue that I don't know, his frustrations and his problems are central to the plot. And
He's
yeah,
just a really multidimensional character, and he's obviously kind of like at the crux of the conflict
yeah.
because he's like the main antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I guess a little backstory.
Yeah.
Quasimodo, everyone's favorite bell ringer. Um, so he was just like he's been living in isolation pretty much his whole life, raised by Frollo,
Yes.
who makes him like his like almost like a servant in a way.
Yeah.
Like it's not a loving
No, not
relationship
at
at
all.
all. It's like master and servant dynamic, and
Mm-hmm.
Frollo in the original book, he is the archdeacon of the cathedral.
Yeah, whereas in the Disney version, he's the Minister of Justice.
Yes, so it's like, church versus state, which is kind of an intriguing difference just because, that affects more of like the motivations.
Yeah.
Um,
And then, like we've talked about before, like for the time period that it's from, the distinction between church and state is blurry also. And I feel like he
mhm.
really represents that kind of blurring between what is, I don't know, like morality in terms of religion, but also in terms of like justice and
Yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of thing too.
And how
Yeah.
does religion affect your sense of right and wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so a little bit more on the plot too. Quasimodo um, meets and basically kind of falls in love with Esmeralda, who is a gypsy in terms of the movie, which I feel like it is a pejorative term nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, by today's standards, they're Romani people. But that is the term they use in the movie.
Yeah, so
So,
I guess yeah, we'll use that term because that's what they say in the movie. That's what the lyrics say. I feel like
yeah.
yeah, just
Yeah, we're not condoning the
excuse
use of it,
the
but,
use of it. But for the
yeah.
context, I think it makes more sense in the way it was written to I don't
Yeah.
know. Anyway, so she's a gypsy girl
Yeah.
and she's this like beautiful and charming person and Frollo is torn over his like, lust and desire for her and what he feels is like righteous, and cuz he feels that she's like a corruptive person.
Yeah, because I mean, overall, he views the gypsies as kind of like the people that will corrupt Paris. He kind of has
Yeah,
this
like they're
xenophobic,
criminals and they're just,
Yeah,
dirty and,
yeah.
they're just lawless,
But
and
then
that's his perception.
exactly, he really puts all of those like feelings of hatred and anger, he really emphasizes it with Esmeralda because he does kind
Mhm.
of inspire these weird feelings of lust and stuff that he can't really
Yeah.
deal with,
Yeah,
for
and that's
sure.
something we'll get into a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's also Captain Phoebus, who is the captain of the guard, I
Mm.
believe,
Yeah, I
and
think so.
he is kind of like an egotistical guy. He thinks he's so hot, and I mean, I think he's supposed to be like this like handsome, charming guy too, whatever. And so Esmeralda like falls in love with him, and he
Yeah.
likes Esmeralda. I don't know if I'd say love, but then again, it's up to interpretation, I guess. And the book is a little different from the movie, but anyway, there's
Oh,
all
for
these
sure.
like crazy love rhombuses, and
Yeah. At the end of the day, Quasimodo is alone by himself.
yeah, um, yeah, and then there's also the basic, storyline is that Frollo's out to get Esmeralda because she is the object of his lust, and therefore she's the object of his like hatred, and he
Yeah,
wants to
because
like destroy her.
she is like what makes him weak,
Yeah,
you
she
know.
embodies all this like, sinfulness that he
Yeah.
feels within himself and what he
Mhm.
projects onto the outer world. And so
Exactly.
he's out to get her. Esmeralda, because she's a nice person, and she wants to help those in need like Quasimodo. Quasimodo helps her, and
Yes.
that angers Frollo and whatnot, and um, basically it ends with Esmeralda is, gonna be burned at the stake, and
Well, he calls her a
Frollo,
witch and
yeah,
stuff,
so yeah, this is Frollo's witch hunt, and in the end, Quasimodo saves Esmeralda from the fire, and she and Phoebus like, live happily ever after, and then Quasimodo pushes Frollo off of the cathedral to his death.
Well, I mean, I guess he's like saving him, but then Frollo is like in a last ditch effort to kill Esmeralda, like try something and he falls off or something.
I mean, he
Something like
he kind of
that.
he kind of like does something weird where it's like he like I think he falls a little bit and catches
Yeah.
like catches himself a little bit on like hanging off the building,
Yeah.
and then he's like, "Oh no, like I'm gonna die or something," and like but the thing like
The thing
breaks.
breaks.
I mean Quasimodo doesn't push him. I guess in the
In
book
the book,
he
he pushes
does.
him. Okay.
And in the book Esmeralda
That's
dies.
interesting because in the movie he like kind of saves him. He's like holding on to him.
I mean, a little bit.
Well, because I just rewatched the last scene, so I'm trying to remember. He Quasimodo saves Esmeralda and like puts her back up, and then like Frollo is hanging off of Quasimodo, and then Frollo, instead of just accepting the help, he swings onto like a gargoyle head thing, and he's holding onto it, and he's trying to get back up to kill
Yeah.
Esmeralda, but then the thing breaks and he falls.
Yeah, so before anyone could really make a decision, he falls to his death, which
Yeah.
is more it's more acceptable for a children's
Yeah.
movie. There's no real like direct murder.
Exactly. I guess I
But
went into
yeah,
all that because there is a difference between,
there is a difference.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Anyways.
yeah, and so that's basically the gist of it. Um but yeah, so our main goal is to do this character study into Frollo
Yes.
because he is the most dynamic character and he is the
Yeah.
one that's probably the most intriguing to me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to unpack because he's just such a like torn, conflicted
Yeah.
person that it's you can't really just lay it out nice and neat. Like it's all like cyclical and like contradictory, and it's just like
Mhm.
this crazy mix of right and wrong and justice and morality and immorality, and how they're not exactly always, black and white.
Exactly. Like I think we've talked about like the reason the characters of this movie, specifically Frollo, are so interesting, especially in comparison with other Disney movies, is because the lines between like right and wrong and all that stuff are really blurred. Like Frollo is someone who's supposed to be representative of like justice and morality and righteousness, and yet
Mhm.
he's the main antagonist, like I think we've
Yeah.
said. And yeah, so I mean, he's really like
Mhm.
his character is the most indicative of that
Yeah.
tension.
And
Yeah.
it's a bit ironic too because he's like the minister of justice. So he's the head judge of right and wrong,
Yeah.
and yet he is one of the most fallible
Yeah.
people, or like he's, by him being up so high in this position, he is susceptible to a lot of criticism and judgment as well, which is probably what makes it harder for him to have like lustfulness and things like that, because any other common person it's just like excusable, but for him it's not.
Yeah, because like for other people, it's expected that they are weak and they can, be tempted by sin and whatnot. And,
Yeah.
but he, like, just him even thinking about it is already like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm like them. I'm weak like them.
And he even like says that um in his soliloquy song Hellfire.
Yeah.
He's making this appeal, confession, whatever you want to call it, to Saint Mary, and he says, you know how I'm so righteous, and like, um, I'm so much purer than the common, vulgar, weak, licentious crowd.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like he sets upon himself, and I guess you could argue society as well, sets upon him like um, this like framework of like what he has to do and how he has to behave
Yeah.
and how moral he must be, especially if he's like given this role of like giving judgment. Like he needs to have this like
Yeah,
unwavering
him
sense of
abiding to
morals.
his, like, moral code is the way that he has power and control over people in a way, too. For
Yeah.
sure.
So we want to get a little bit into some lyrics that we find especially interesting and telling about Frollo's character.
Yes.
So the first song in the musical is Bells of Notre Dame,
Yeah.
which
It really,
introduces the story,
yeah.
but also introduces like how like Frollo interacts with the world at large, and like how
Yeah.
he's viewed and like what his persona is.
Yeah. And it does, like, from the get-go kind of set up that tension between how Frollo acts toward and, like, what he does with other people in the world and then how he thinks of himself. And,
Mhm.
yeah. Um,
So like some interesting lines are that Frollo longed to purge the world of vice and sin, and he saw corruption everywhere except within. Which, I mean, I think that's like the general kind of perception of him, is that, like,
yeah.
though he believes that he has the job of, like, getting rid of corruption and
Hmm.
evil, he is still so susceptible to it.
He is so susceptible, and I think it's interesting that it says, like, he saw the corruption everywhere except within, but it's, at least in how we've interpreted it, it's more of, I guess, a frustration and avoidance of that susceptibility. I guess it's
Hmm.
not that he can't see that he's not corrupt, because I think he's very aware of the
Yeah,
fact that he is, and
I
that's
think.
where, the drama is.
Yeah, it's like this hyper awareness to
Yeah,
it is what drives this frustration.
exactly.
Because if he wasn't aware of it, nothing would be wrong.
Hmm.
But he knows that he had, or I don't know if he wants to say he's corrupt, but he knows that he has like these weaknesses
Yeah,
that he doesn't allow himself to have.
exactly.
And that's why it's so hard for him to like deal with it, because like he can't escape them, yet he can't deal with them. And so he kind of
Yeah.
like represses it and like puts blame on others, and like he will like
For sure.
redirect his like um I don't know, self-loathing, and like I don't know, like
Yeah,
his
definitely.
issues are redirected onto others, and so that's why he's like
Especially
I
others that
blame
are,
everyone else for it.
yeah, especially others that are more like vulnerable or more susceptible.
Or like just
Um,
weaker, kind of like,
yeah.
Quasimodo, or like,
hmm
Esmeralda, she's like a minority.
Yeah, people who he can easily kind of place these, I don't know, bad qualities on, and
Yeah,
people
like
will believe it.
stereotypes and whatever. Like
Yeah.
people will believe him if he's like Quasimodo's a monster and Esmeralda is like, a sinful
Yeah.
creature or something. Like people would society at large would be on his side
Yeah, he
in
definitely
that
uses
argument.
his authority to kind of mask his own vulnerabilities and
Yeah.
then, target others, like we've said.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Um Another interesting thing too is this idea of religion and how
Yes.
that influences one's life, because obviously there's a difference between motivations, whether Frollo is the archdeacon or he's the minister of justice, because
hmm
that though religion has a lot of interplay with um, the government, especially at that time, like
Yeah, and the Catholic
around
Church in
like
France, like,
medieval. Yeah, I mean, seriously, it makes perfect sense. However, I think motivations are a bit different just because like sin versus like the law
yeah, the weird, like,
is an interesting
merging
difference.
of that in this film, I think, is a really solid
Yes.
idea to,
And I think it's
analyze.
interesting to look at it too, because I think what makes it almost too complex for like children to understand is why they changed Frollo's character to be a judge instead of the priest, because as a priest it doesn't make sense why they would have these like weaknesses, because a priest's supposed to be holy
Yeah,
and
and
pure
that's
and
like a
righteous.
choice to be that way,
Yeah, and I think it's a bit too much when you're implying that a priest is like can have these like really
Yeah.
dark corruptions
Yeah.
when he's
Yeah,
supposed to
because a
be
priest,
representing godliness.
yeah, he's acting within his religion, whereas a judge, yes, maybe in the story he is a religious person, but that's not essentially what his role is to
His role
be,
is like, I need to maintain law and order
Yeah.
and get rid of corruption,
Yeah.
not like, you know, if she's like
hmm
the devil. I mean,
Yeah.
but in a way, there's still a lot of blending, because like in Hellfire, it's especially evident. Like he
hmm
places a lot of like parallels between the devil and like a seductress, like,
Yeah.
and the witch, and also like he takes on a lot of like,
hmm
you know devilish qualities. Like
Yeah.
it's weird because like in him wanting so much to be godly, he becomes like the devil, and
Yeah.
he lets the like the the darkness in him control him much more than any sense of religion
Yeah,
or
for
like
sure.
purity ever would, because like he's so entrenched in this
hmm
turmoil that he can only see a way out of it by like perpetuating evil.
Yeah.
It's just like in a different way that seems righteous to him, because he's like, oh no, this is like God's plan.
Yeah.
But is it really?
Yeah, and like, I think Lucifer himself, or the devil, what have you, that was his whole, I mean, within that story, like that was his whole goal also, was to
Yeah.
get out of God's control, to kind of have his own sense of control over
Yeah.
things and enact his, way of
Mhm.
law and order
And
and
like there's
whatnot.
still that sense of like, oh, but like I want to do what God wants of me, but like still inside
Mm.
they have the like this sense of they know what's best.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you could draw an interesting parallel between like Lucifer and Frollo as like this
Mhm.
fallen from grace, like you, you just took it too far, kind of.
Yeah.
Like your righteousness got the best of you, and now
Yeah.
you're like just entrenched in your own issues.
Yeah, and like kind of like what you said, I liked. He's kind of blinded by this righteousness to the point that all the acts that he's committing against people in the name of righteousness are
Mhm.
really evil acts against
Yeah.
people, just to have things be his way. Because
Yeah.
obviously people don't always fit um, into his order and whatnot.
Yeah.
Something you said earlier, just briefly, going back to the corruption thing when you were making the parallels. I think even the idea of corruption is an interesting merging
Yeah.
between like law and religion as well, because there's obviously a
Mhm.
corruption of like the soul and being tempted by sin and whatnot, but then also like criminalization by the
Yeah.
law, like that is, criminal
There's like
corruption.
different senses of what's structure and order. Like there's God's law and then there's
Yeah.
like man's law.
Mhm.
And it's all in a way subjective and relative.
Yeah.
And even though and like another thing too, like we talked about earlier, is that like because Frollo puts himself on, like he holds himself so highly, and because
Mhm.
society places a lot of like responsibility on him, like for judgment and like order, that he has a lot to like uphold. Like he has
Yeah.
to answer to a lot, but like the common vulgar crowd that he calls them, they don't have those same expectations, so they
This is
can
true,
be
yeah.
lustful and they can be
Mhm.
sinners, but it's excusable and they're still like just like normal people. But for him,
Mhm.
he's not allowed those
Yeah.
luxuries, and so like this sense of corruption for him, it's so corrupt. But for
Mhm.
anybody else to have lustful thoughts about like
Mhm.
Esmeralda, it's like
It's like, okay, like
it's fine.
that's something you can still, confess to and be saved from, whatever. But like
It's
for
not
him, just
like,
even the thought of it is that fall from grace. And I guess kind of
yeah,
shortening of the gap between, the vulgar crowd and himself,
exactly.
because he has to maintain that space in order to make his I don't know, responsibility more like, I don't know, more apparent, or
Mhm.
he has to have his larger role in things,
Yeah, it's
separate
like
from.
to whom a lot is given, a lot is like expected.
Yeah.
It's like that's the kind of mentality he holds himself to.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and that's why he's like so tormented by this and like has this like critical point when he's, confessing to Maria in Hellfire.
Yeah, because that's really the moment of that self-awareness where he allows himself to look within himself and really explore that vulnerability that he
Yeah.
hates,
Because you could tell from the get-go that he has these like immoral desires but just represses it. But
Yeah.
Hellfire is when he really like fully admits to it. But
Yeah.
then again, it's still like he's not taking the blame, and like there's all this repetition
Yeah.
of blame and fault, and he's always like, it's not my fault,
Mhm.
I'm not to blame, it's Esmeralda's fault, it's the world's fault, it's
Yeah.
God's fault.
Yeah, even in his confession, he's still so aware that he's able to place the blame on others, to still not
Yeah.
accept,
Mhm.
even when recognizing his fallibility, he still cannot accept that he could be
He's fallible
corrupted. And
too.
yeah,
Like his
exactly.
fallibility, he'll only accept it to the point of being like, it's just that's how God made me. He's like,
Yeah.
it's not my fault that I'm corrupt. Like he
Well, God
says,
made me that way.
yeah, seriously, he's like, if in oh, it's not my fault if in God's plan he made the devil so much stronger than a man. He's like,
Oh, I
it's
love that
God's
line.
fault. I know, it's amazing. And he's like, it's the devil. Like I can't
Mhm.
help it. Like that's what they did to me.
Mhm.
Um, like he's like a child regressing back to these like
Yeah.
this like infantile like panic and
Mhm.
wanting so much to do what's right, but like having been caught,
Yeah.
you
And then he
can't do any.
confesses,
It's like,
to
yeah,
like the mother and the father,
and it's like,
Mary and God and whatnot.
yeah,
It's
these
an
like desperate
interesting.
attempts to regain his honor in the face of these like, I mean, almost parental, I don't know, like the super ego kind of
Mhm.
like this holy, divine, detached sense
Yeah.
of authority that's unwavering, and you will never
Mhm.
match up to it.
Yeah.
And this is something too that harkens back to the Bells of Notre Dame, the animation and everything.
Mhm.
Um, it's like there's like these like statues of like holy figures, and they have like
Oh,
eyes, and they like
yes.
look and they're like chanting, and it's like they're like the
Yeah.
holy host who is judging him, and he's switched roles where now he's the
He's,
subject and he's a
yeah,
target.
exactly. Yeah, and like being under that scrutiny, he's really kind of falling apart.
Yeah.
He really cannot deal with it. He has this just emotional outburst where he's laying everything out. He just emotionally like cannot deal with it. I don't
Mhm.
know.
He can
It's
never
interesting.
own up to it as much as it's true because he can never totally just let go. And I think that's
Mm,
something else kind of brought up in Hellfire, about, like, you know, let her taste the fires of hell or else let her be mine and mine alone.
mhm.
And you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I guess we can kind of move on to talking about Esmeralda's role a little bit in this whole self-awareness deal. But I think in Hellfire, the idea that he wants to possess Esmeralda or
Mhm.
destroy her, the idea of like possession, but also, disgust and, loathing of
Yeah.
her. It's an interesting idea. I think specifically he talks about where does he say destroy?
I think it's further down.
Oh, okay, I got it. No, wait. Okay,
Destroy
yeah.
Esmeralda, let her taste the fires of hell, or else let her be mine and mine alone. At the end, he
Oh, that's the
says,
one you said, yeah.
she will be mine or she will burn.
Yeah, I think. Oh, okay. Got it. Got the gears going. I think it was my question at first was, at least in the beginning half of the song, does he ever actually see a possibility of letting go of, I don't know, his morals, whatever, what have you? Does he ever see a possibility of actually owning Esmeralda?
I don't think he does because he won't let himself. And obviously, he's kind of posing these questions by being like, "Oh, she'll be mine or she'll burn." I don't think he's ever accepting the fact that she could be mine, could be his. Oh my god, that she could be like his possession
Yeah,
because he can never let go. Like he
yeah,
could it because at that point it's no turning back and he will just be like
exactly.
thrown to the wanton ways
Yeah,
of corruption and he can
exactly.
never retain anything of his like his morality or sense of righteousness if he accepts that like I don't know
Exactly.
licentiousness. Like if he actually could possess her, it would mean that all this was for nothing and he's just like a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows that. I think he recognizes that, but like also is that what he really wants? I think it's like
Yeah.
partly why there's like this cyclical kind of like nature of his problem is that like he doesn't really want her. Like it's almost like
Mm-hmm.
out of his control that like he
That's why
is
he's so
lustful
angry
towards
about it
her.
because I think he actually says like I he feels so out of control about it because he's like she has created these emotions within me that I
Mhm.
can't control. I can't do anything about them.
Yeah.
I hate that I feel this way and I can't do anything about it. The only way that I could do something is to either possess her, which I could never do, so I have to destroy her. Like if he does
Yeah.
possess her, that destroys him, which is never an option. So the only
Yeah.
option
Well
is
said.
to destroy her.
Yeah, he does. He says, "I'm not to blame. It's not my fault. It's the gypsy girl, the witch who set this flame." So
Yeah.
it's like it wasn't even his fault that he feels that way. He's like
Mhm.
someone else like planted these like
Even if it's
feelings
his
in
emotions,
me.
yeah.
He's like it's completely out of my control. I
Mhm.
would never let myself be like this if I could help
Mhm.
it, but it's like so outside of him so
Yeah.
like she's not really like a desire to be had. It's like because it's like different from like lust and like love. Obviously,
Yes.
it's like this desire to possess, but like in such a like a negative
Yeah.
way.
And like the basis just like
Power and
yeah.
like desire, and it's just such a like complex kind of like
Yeah.
you know lust and hate.
Mhm. The idea that like Frollo is kind of separated from his feelings and emotions is kind of interesting to me. I think it plays into like his role as a judge where he's very guided by his mind and
He
whatnot.
won't let his emotions get in the
Yeah.
way of
Yeah.
what's right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But
But
this
as
is,
a human, like
yeah.
he exists, he's not
Yeah,
just a mind. He's a
he's a
person with
fallible
feeling.
human
Yeah.
being, and he can't accept that.
Yeah.
And Esmeralda challenges that in him, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think he has this like breakdown
Yeah.
of character, because like he can't reconcile having any amount of like weakness,
Mm-hmm.
because he's not a weak person. Like he creates
Exactly.
himself to be steadfast and iron
Mm-hmm.
fist, and I rule
Mm-hmm.
people through law and order. And
Yeah.
if he can't abide by those rules, like his own rules, like he's
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah. I think the idea of that and just like I don't know, this separation between like his mind, which he feels like he can control, he can like mold it, and he can have his own ideas about morality and righteousness, justice, all that. But like where his emotions, he obviously has no control over, even if he does feel lust and passion and
Mhm.
all that stuff. And I don't know, I
Yeah.
just thought that contradiction, I feel, is another
Mhm.
layer to this whole, frustration.
Yeah, it's interesting because he believes he can separate all of his like the qualities of, like, I
Yeah.
guess like he believes he can separate his mind from his emotions, from his like, sexuality. Like
Yeah.
he believes that they can exist separately, or they're like
Mhm.
they can all be controlled individually, but he realizes that that's not how it works, and like some things you
Mhm.
can't help,
Yeah.
and that's just how it is. But
Yeah.
like he won't accept that, and he, like, even if he sees that in himself, like, well, that can't be helped, he's like, well, it's the devil who made me like this, it's Esmeralda who made me like
Yeah.
this. And he won't just, like, it's his own like inability to accept his humanity that leads to his demise.
Exactly.
And he never redeems himself
No.
in any way. It's like to the end he's just as like corrupt as he ever was, if not
He
more.
would rather destroy himself, believing that
Yeah.
he's still in control of himself and he has power over everything within
Yeah.
himself, rather than just accept his own like human
Hmm.
fallibility. Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting parallel you can make too, when in Hellfire he says like, she'll be mine or she will burn, or like
Mhm.
destroy her, or like I'll have to do it. It's kind of like you could almost put him in that position at that point, where
Yeah.
he's like willing to, he's not outwardly saying this, but you can interpret that he's almost like willing to be destroyed if that means it will like end his corruption.
Exactly. Cuz it's like
and
either she's going down or I'm going down.
and I think you could make a reflection between, like, instead of like it's either Esmeralda or me, it's either like his morals or his corruption, one of them has to win and
Exactly.
one of them has to be destroyed. And since his
Yeah.
own, like, weakness and whatnot can't ever be, like,
Yeah.
he could never control that and like get rid of that, he himself must go. And he does lose all his like his morals and stuff at the end, because he's
Mhm.
like burning Paris down. Like, it's
Yeah.
he creates hell. Like,
He
he's the
literally,
devil.
yeah, and he falls into it, that
And
fall from
that's
grace
ironic
into
too, is that he
hell.
set Paris on fire. He was the one who caused all of this turmoil, because everyone's just
Hmm.
trying to live their lives.
In a weird way, you can maybe read it as like Hellfire as being his realization that it is going to end that way because he can escape from
Yeah.
his,
Yeah.
humanness, his
It's kind of
humanity.
ironic because he's like, she'll be mine or she will burn. It's like, you could almost say that, like, he's being like, I'll overcome this or I'm gonna be
Yeah,
destroyed.
exactly.
And so he's like so resolute now that he's like, I will destroy her. So I'm gonna burn down
Exactly.
Paris to destroy her and get rid of her.
But just really a
But he
reflection on
couldn't
himself.
win. It
I
is.
mean, especially if we're saying that Esmeralda is so objectified, she just becomes like the vessel for these, I don't know, or like the thing upon which he like throws
He
these,
projects what he
yeah,
rejects in himself onto her.
exactly.
And so she becomes just, instead of being like his general sense of like sinfulness, lustfulness, weakness, he projects it all onto her as if it's
Yeah,
all her. And
yeah,
in destroying just this one single person, then he'll be saved, which is obviously not true.
hmm,
He's just deluded himself into believing that.
yeah,
But since he has like no other he can't see another way out. Like, he believes his only way to triumph is to destroy,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, that
that's
makes me
obviously not
think
gonna work
back
out.
to the Hellfire line that we had talked about earlier. The devil is stronger than a man.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Really like this line. There are layered meanings to it
Yes, I
based
love
on
this.
what we've just said. If he's admitting, that the devil is stronger than a man, I think you can kind of read, this whole like destruction and stuff, like his his wanting to be stronger than his own like human fallibility in a
Mhm.
way like makes him the devil. But
Yeah,
or
it's
that he in a weird way is striving to be like that, because the devil's stronger
yeah.
than,
He
I don't
just
know.
wants to be stronger than himself. Like, he wants to like separate his weakness and be like, cuz he believes he's better than that. Like, he doesn't believe that's him. He believes that's like
Mhm.
implanted in him, that this
Mhm.
like corruption. So he believes he can separate himself from his corruption, and his true self is the righteous self that enacts
Mm.
justice. And either he's going to be God or he's going to be the devil, but in either way he's going to destroy whatever is causing him this turmoil.
Yeah. And then like the other meaning that I kind of like from this line, since he is talking about Esmeralda and whatnot, I think it's really cool that he says the devil's stronger than a man, because obviously Esmeralda's a woman, and that whole idea
It's
that like,
separating, like, women are associated with the devil.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. That was that was just like
Yeah,
two
no,
of the
yeah, you could say
meaning.
that.
It's just
It's like he probably would be, I'm sure he's a misogynist and believes that women are seductresses and they're like evil or they're witches and they lead men to corruption because that's
mhm,
what Esmeralda does.
exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that was I just like those lines.
Yeah. So I guess a little comparison too we could make is between this Disney film and others,
Yeah.
and like fairy tales in general, like children's stories, because um, Esmeralda is like a beautiful, rapture. I don't know.
Alluring.
She's like this beautiful, desirable person, and
Yeah.
that's seen as evil in
Mhm.
this context versus beauty in like fairy tales and whatever like is synonymous with like goodness, and
Yeah.
it's when you're ugly you're synonymous with bad. And I think that's an interesting angle you could throw into with Hunchback, because
Exactly. Because
Quasimodo, it's
Quasimodo.
like Quasimodo's held to those standards. Like, there's multiple standards here for
Mm.
like beauty. Like, Quasimodo's held to standards to be beautiful because he's so ugly, he's thought of as bad and a monster. Esmeralda
Yeah.
is really beautiful, but she is thought of as like evil because she's like seductive. So in a
Yeah.
way, like beauty, and I think like maybe in like this Christian regard, is just a double-edged sword. It's like you're
Yeah.
expected to be beautiful, but when you are beautiful, you're still like, losing. Like, you
Exactly.
can't win. And especially if you're like a woman, because women are objectified. It's harder at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. Um.
But yeah, I think it's partly what makes it kind of more complex for children is because obviously Esmeralda's a sympathetic character, but like Frollo has all these like overarching like kind of Christian themes of, you know, modesty and like
Yeah.
virtuousness and purity, and how that's not synonymous with being physically beautiful, because that's like evil in itself, as if you're
Yeah.
like seducing people into corruption.
It's like she's. It's like you. Okay, you're only allowed to be beautiful if you like never embrace it and never are aware of it, or
Or
I don't
like if it's in
know.
a pure way, which I think is
Yeah.
also indicative of like racism or whatever, because
Yeah.
like her being like a gypsy is she's exotified as opposed to being like a normal like French woman. So
Yeah.
that's considered like her beauty is like evil, but like
Yeah.
other beauty, like, like a white woman is like
Mhm.
could be more like pure.
Yeah, because she's already this exotic person that they see as corrupting this like
Yeah.
French society. Therefore, if she's like that and she is beautiful, there's nothing, like, her beauty can't exist other than to further corrupt people and to
Yeah.
inspire these lustful thoughts
It's
and
like the
temptations.
reason she's beautiful is not because she's, it's any marker of character. It's because she's like, the devil makes her
Exactly.
tempting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, especially because Quasimodo is so, physically deformed and obviously not beautiful in that way, but then that the fact that his character, that he's so pure and his soul is like beautiful in a way, and that he has more of a pure love for Esmeralda and stuff, whereas, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic maybe one could look into. I'm not sure how
Yeah.
much you could say about it, but like the idea of like beauty and
Yeah.
like morals or character, because like
Yeah.
Quasimodo's ugly, but he has like a beautiful soul.
Yeah.
Esmeralda's beautiful inside and out. Phoebus is like beautiful
Phoebus
outside,
is, like,
but
physically,
inside
yeah.
he's questionable. He's a
Yeah.
bit he's not like a bad person. He's just a bit like callous and
Yeah.
not genuine. He's not looking out for anyone's best interest but his
Exactly.
own. And I think
Yeah.
that's partly why he's a bit deceptive too, because Esmeralda like falls in love with him, but then she is, he like breaks her heart and like he doesn't save her, and it's just kind of tragic in the end that like, your looks don't always mean
Yeah. Yeah, I
what
think
you think they do.
I think, like, since we're talking about like the broad scope of Disney films and stuff, like, I think that the reason that this film is so effective and why
It makes you question things.
yeah, because in general you have like the stereotypes where like we were saying, like, good is beautiful and evil is like ugly or sinister in some way. But since this story is a commentary on, like, physical versus inward beauty
And
and
also
that
the
kind of
like
thing,
relativity of things.
Yeah, and I think because of that like this adaptation is really good in exploring those themes, because obviously like the good-looking people are they can be questionable, like Phoebus, or they can represent like different values. It's not so black and white,
Yeah, definitely nothing's black and white. Like personalities, characters, morals, nothing's cut and dry, and everyone has like a bit of a mix, and that's what
Exactly.
makes them like dynamic more so than other
For sure.
children's like movies and Disney
Yeah.
movies, because there's so much complexity within one person, and you can't even just be like this person's good and this person's bad.
Yeah.
Because I mean, those are almost like arbitrary identifiers, and everyone
Yeah.
has a complexity within them, and everyone can be sympathetic but still be fallible and still be
Exactly.
subject to you know all kinds of like darkness and like
Yeah, and that's
issues.
so evident in Frollo, because he's supposed to be the minister of the minister of justice. He's a judge. He's supposed to represent this black and white, clear cut, sense of the law, and that he represents like good in this lawful way. But he's such a corrupt, evil person that he's just a perfect embodiment of that.
He's
idea,
just the farthest from black and white.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it just I don't know, the film just does a really good job in kind of exploring those themes.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a great film all around.
Yeah.
And it's just such an entertaining movie, and it makes you ponder things, but it
Yeah.
also just is, I don't know, it's just such a fun experience. The
Yeah.
whole production was done so well and in such a beautiful way, and like the plot,
They just weren't
and
really afraid to take
characters.
risks,
And that's, I think, what worked to their benefit. I mean,
Exactly.
so it makes it such a like a kind of poignant movie, because there's so many complexities to it. There's so many, issues and nuances you could look into, because there's a lot of meaning, because it's more indicative of like humanity.
Exactly. Yeah, because I mean, I think they being Disney, like, they've shifted to this idea that they need to have very clear-cut characters, and like, I don't know.
They're easier to like digest.
Exactly, which I think, belittles children
And it's like I guess supposedly easier to convey a message.
Yeah, but it's like obviously a child can interpret whatever message they want, but if you're going to be making films for them that they can revisit later, I think
This is a lot more meaningful in a
exactly.
lasting way. I mean,
Yeah.
that's also given that this is based on an
Yeah.
amazing novel. Like Disney can't just make this up.
Yeah. But it's just
But
like it had an impact on me as
it
a
really
child,
did.
and it had a different impact on me as an
Yeah.
adult, but it was an
Mhm.
equally strong response. So I feel like I don't know, their risks
It
and
was just
stuff were
reworked in a
effective.
really
Yeah.
in an accessible way that's
Yeah.
also entertaining, but still
Yeah.
retains a lot of the original integrity.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. It's
Exactly.
just really great.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of wraps up our little character analysis. We
Yeah.
recommend you rewatch the Disney version of Hunchback
Yeah.
if you haven't. It's really
Yeah,
good.
and just to like have your own interpretations and
Yeah.
your own thoughts because this is such a, you know, it's such it's so open for debate.
Yeah, you can have like a religious reading, you can have just a reading between like beauty and I don't know, there's so
Like,
many different.
human nature and like religion. Like there's a lot of angles to
Yeah,
look at this
for sure.
and it's just I think it's worthwhile. I just have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for
Thank
joining us for
you.
our second installment of our Unofficial Film Club podcast. We
Yay.
hope you stick around for more.
Yeah, we will try and come back at you with some interesting thoughts. So stay
Yeah,
tuned.
stay tuned for our next installment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.